Hey guys, how's it going? Hope you're doing well. My name is Crown, and today I'm going to read you some very interesting stories that I hope that you're gonna love. And now, without further ado, let's go!
When I was growing up in the 80s, things were different. My parents both worked crazy hours at the factory, leaving early in the morning and coming home after dark most days. That meant I spent a lot of time with my grandmother after school. She lived with us and basically ran the house when my parents weren't around. Back then, hitting kids wasn't just normal, it was expected. If you didn't discipline your kids physically, people thought you were a bad parent. My grandmother took this very seriously. She had her own special way of doing things that I still remember clear as day. Whenever I did something wrong, or she thought I did something wrong, she'd give me the same order to go get a spoon. Not just any spoon, a wooden spoon from the kitchen drawer. I had to pick it out myself, walk back to wherever she was sitting, hand it to her, then hold out my palm and wait for her to smack it as hard as she could. She never held back. Over the months, I'd figured out the wooden spoon game. The small ones hurt way more because they concentrated all the force into a tiny area. The big ones spread out the impact and moved slower through the air. But if I picked too small of a spoon, my grandmother would hit even harder, like she was punishing me for trying to be smart about it. The day everything changed started like any other. I was home from school doing my homework at the kitchen table while my grandmother watched her soap operas in the living room. That's when she called me over with her sharp voice. I walked into the living room and saw her standing next to my dad's little glass garden thing. It was a small glass case with rocks, water, and some moss inside. My mom had given it to him for his birthday because he liked those kinds of nature displays. The glass was cracked right down the middle. She demanded to know what happened to it, then immediately accused me of breaking it. I told her I didn't break it and that I'd been doing homework the whole time. She called me a liar and said nobody else had been in the room. I insisted I was telling the truth and that I hadn't even touched it. She got even angrier and asked if I thought she was stupid. I said no, but kept trying to explain that I really didn't break it. She accused me of calling her a liar now. That's when she got that look in her eyes, the one that meant she was done talking. She ordered me to go get a spoon right now. I stood there for a second, feeling my face get hot. I was so tired of this. Every time something went wrong in the house, it was automatically my fault. Every time I tried to defend myself, she said I was lying. I was 8 years old and I felt completely helpless. But today was different. Today I was angry enough to do something about it. I walked into the kitchen and opened the drawer where we kept the wooden spoons. Usually I'd pick something medium-sized to minimize the damage. But this time I grabbed the thinnest wooden spoon I could find. It was barely thicker than a pencil. I held it at both ends, put my knee in the middle, and pushed down hard. The wood cracked with a quiet snap. I carefully fitted the two pieces back together so it looked normal, then walked back to the living room. I handed her the sabotage spoon and held out my palm. She took it without really looking at it. Her glasses were so thick she could barely see anything anyway. She commented that it was an awfully thin spoon I'd picked, squinting at me with this angry expression I'd never seen before. I guess the look on my face was different too, because for the first time ever, I wasn't scared. I was furious. She told me to wipe that look off my face right now. I didn't. I just stood there looking at her, my palm still stretched out. That made her even madder. She raised the spoon high above her head and brought it down as hard as she could. The spoon exploded into pieces. I immediately started screaming at the top of my lungs. Not because it hurt. The broken spoon had barely touched my hand, but because I knew this was my chance. I wailed like she'd just broken my arm. I ran to my room crying as loud as I could and slammed the door. Through the wall, I could hear her in the living room making worried noises. She didn't come after me, which was unusual. Normally, she'd drag me back out to finish the punishment. When my parents got home a few hours later, I stayed in my room with the door cracked, just enough to hear what was happening. My grandmother was in the kitchen with them and she sounded really upset. She told them she didn't know what had come over her and that she'd hit me so hard the spoon broke in half. My mom asked if the spoon really broke. My grandmother said it broke into pieces and that she'd never seen anything like it. My dad asked if I was okay. She said she thought so, but felt terrible because she had no idea she was hitting me that hard all this time. My mom suggested maybe they should talk to me. My grandmother said no to let me be because she thought she'd really scared me and herself too. My dad said maybe this was a sign they needed to find other ways to discipline me. My grandmother agreed, saying she was getting too old for this anyway and asking for mercy from above. That was the last time my grandmother ever hit me with a wooden spoon. Actually, it was the last time she ever hit me at all. She never said sorry to me directly, but I could tell she felt guilty about what she thought had happened. She'd look at me differently sometimes, like she was worried about me. I never told her what I'd really done. Even when I became a teenager and we'd argue about other things, I kept that secret. Even when I became an adult and moved out, I never said anything. She lived with us for another 10 years after that, and I watched her carry that guilt the whole time. Sometimes I'd catch her looking at my hands like she was checking for damage she'd caused. She'd buy me extra treats or let me stay up late watching TV, probably trying to make up for what she thought was the worst thing she'd ever done to me. I finally told my parents the truth when I was almost 40 years old. They couldn't believe I'd kept it secret for so long. My mom laughed until she cried, and my dad just shook his head and said I was a clever little devil. My grandmother had been gone for 5 years by then, but I still felt a little guilty about never telling her. Not because I regretted what I did, she needed to stop hitting me, and that was the only way I knew how to make it happen. But because I could have saved her from feeling bad about it for all those years. Then again, maybe feeling bad about it for a while was exactly what she needed. I started as a junior recruiter straight out of college, worked my way up to senior recruiter, and finally landed a spot on our company's core hiring team about 2 years ago. It's a position I earned through consistent performance and a reputation for finding the right people for the right jobs. I take it seriously because I know how much damage a bad hire can do to a team. My company is mid-sized, about 200 employees, and we handle logistics coordination for several major clients. It's the kind of work where attention to detail can make or break million-dollar contracts. When someone messes up, it doesn't just affect our team, it affects our client's entire supply chain. 3 months ago, we had an opening for a logistics coordinator position. This wasn't some entry-level job. We needed someone who could handle complex shipping schedules, coordinate with multiple vendors, and manage client communications. The role required someone who was organized, could work under pressure, and had at least basic knowledge of industry standards. We posted the job and got about 30 applications. I narrowed it down to 8 candidates for phone interviews, then brought in 4 for face-to-face meetings. The interviews went well overall, and I had a clear ranking in my mind. My top choice was a guy with 3 years of relevant experience who answered every question clearly, and even caught a deliberate error I put in a sample document. Second was a woman who had slightly less experience but showed great problem-solving skills. Third was someone who was a bit green but asked smart questions and seemed eager to learn. Then there was the fourth candidate. She showed up 15 minutes late to her interview without calling ahead. When I asked her about her previous experience, she gave vague answers about working with different companies and doing various tasks. When I asked her to explain what a bill of lading was, which is absolutely basic in our industry, she stared at me for 10 seconds and said it was like a document for legal things. I had my rankings ready and was preparing to extend an offer to my top choice when my department supervisor called me into his office. My supervisor said he wanted to talk about the coordinator position. I told him my recommendation was ready and that I thought we should go with my top candidate because his experience was exactly what we needed. But my supervisor said he actually wanted me to hire the woman who interviewed Thursday afternoon. I was confused because that was my fourth choice, the one who showed up late and couldn't answer basic questions. I told him she ranked lowest in my assessment and couldn't explain fundamental industry concepts. He insisted I should give her another look and said, "Sometimes people are just nervous in interviews." I explained that I understood interview nerves, but she couldn't define a bill of lading, which was like a mechanic not knowing what a wrench is. He told me to hire her anyway and said he would take the heat if there were any issues. Something about his tone felt off. He wasn't making logical arguments about her potential or hidden strengths. He was just insisting I hire her without any real justification. I asked why he was pushing for this particular candidate and whether he noticed something in her application that I missed. He just told me to trust him and said it was a direct order. I left his office feeling uneasy. Direct orders about hiring decisions were unusual, especially when they went against clear performance data. Over the next day, I heard through office gossip that my supervisor had been seen having coffee with this candidate before her interview. Someone else mentioned they'd heard he was interested in her. The pieces clicked together. He wasn't making a business decision. He was trying to impress someone he had a personal interest in. I went back to him one more time with her interview notes, hoping to change his mind. I told him I really thought we should reconsider and showed him the assessment scores compared to the other candidates. He said the decision was made and told me to hire her. I realized I had two choices: refuse and probably face disciplinary action, or do what he asked and document everything carefully. I chose the latter. I made copies of all the interview notes, including her poor performance indicators. I saved the email where he instructed me to hire her. I documented our conversations about the decision. If this went sideways, I wanted proof that the choice wasn't mine. I called her with the offer, and she accepted immediately. I tried to set her up for success despite my reservations. I arranged extra training sessions, paired her with our most patient senior coordinator, and made sure she had all the resources she needed. Within 2 weeks, the problem started. She would miss important deadlines because she forgot to check critical emails. She confused metric and imperial measurements on shipping orders. When clients called with questions, she would transfer them to me instead of trying to help. The first major disaster happened 3 weeks in. She was supposed to send a confidential client file to our insurance company for a claim review. Instead, she sent it to one of our competitor companies. The file contained sensitive pricing information and strategic details about our client's operations. Our client was furious. They threatened to terminate their contract immediately and demanded answers about how their confidential information ended up with their competitor. I asked her how this happened since the insurance company email and the competitor email looked completely different. She said she was in a hurry and guessed she clicked the wrong one from the drop-down. I asked if she didn't double-check before sending since the file was marked confidential. She said she thought it was fine since they were both companies we worked with. I had to explain to her that we don't work with our competitors, and that confidential meant confidential. 2 weeks later, she approved a purchase order for $45,000 worth of packaging materials when the budgeted amount was $4,500. She didn't notice the extra zero. I asked if she reviewed the total before approving it. She said she saw it was for packaging like we discussed, so she approved it. When I asked about the amount and whether it seemed high, she said she didn't really look at the numbers that closely and figured if it was wrong, someone would catch it. The vendor had already begun production on the order. We were stuck paying for materials we couldn't use and didn't need. Within 6 weeks, we lost our biggest client due to the confidential file incident. Another client reduced their contract by 60% after repeated delays on her projects. The financial impact was getting serious. Upper management started asking questions. During a department meeting, our regional director said we'd had significant client losses recently and needed to understand what happened with our processes. When my supervisor was asked directly about the hiring decision, he tried to deflect. He said sometimes hiring decisions don't work out as expected, and it's hard to predict how someone will perform. The regional director said he was looking at the interview notes, and this candidate scored poorly on every assessment. He asked why she was hired over clearly better candidates. My supervisor said the hiring team makes collaborative decisions based on various factors. He was trying to spread the blame to the entire team, including me. I said I could clarify that and told them I had documentation showing that I recommended against hiring this candidate based on her interview performance. I explained that the decision to hire her was made despite my assessment. I provided HR with copies of all my documentation, the interview scores, the emails, the notes from our conversations. Everything was there in black and white. The investigation moved quickly after that. Human Resources interviewed several team members about the hiring process. Someone mentioned seeing my supervisor having coffee with a candidate before her interview. Another person confirmed the office rumors about his personal interest in her. Within 2 weeks, HR completed their review. My supervisor was reassigned to a different department with no direct reports. The candidate was quietly let go during her probationary period. The whole situation cost our company around $200,000 in lost contracts and wasted purchases. My supervisor's attempt to impress his crush ended up destroying his career progression and damaging our department's reputation. I'm still on the hiring team and I still take my job seriously, but now I document everything even more carefully. My daughter and I moved to this quiet neighborhood about 8 years ago after my divorce was finalized. We were looking for a fresh start. For the most part, it's been great. The neighbors are friendly, the kids play together in the streets, and there's a real sense of community. Well, except for one neighbor. Karen moved in 3 houses down from us about 2 years ago with her teenage son. From day one, she made it clear she thought she was better than everyone else. She complained about kids playing too loudly, called the homeowners association about minor things like someone's grass being half an inch too tall, and generally made life difficult for anyone who didn't bow to her demands. Her son is 15 and has always given me the creeps. He's way too interested in the younger kids in the neighborhood, especially the girls. I've caught him staring at my daughter through our fence more times than I can count. My daughter is only 10, so you can imagine how uncomfortable this makes me. Last month, things got worse. Karen started pushing for her son and my daughter to be friends. She'd corner me at the mailbox or when I was getting groceries from my car, talking about how sweet my daughter was and how much her son liked her. I told her my daughter was only 10 and her son was 15, but she brushed it off saying age was just a number and they'd make a cute couple. I made it clear that this was completely inappropriate and asked her to keep her son away from my daughter. She called me ridiculous and said my daughter should feel lucky her son was interested in her. I made it crystal clear that I didn't want her son anywhere near my daughter. I even talked to my daughter about staying away from both of them, but Karen wouldn't take no for an answer. She started showing up at our door uninvited, bringing her son along. She'd suggest play dates, sleepovers, and even mentioned something about them spending time together in the treehouse she'd built in her backyard. Every time I declined, Karen would argue that I was being overprotective and that kids needed to socialize. I'd remind her that my daughter socialized plenty with kids her own age. She'd insist her son was mature for his age and would be good for my daughter. I kept telling her no and asking her to respect that, but she didn't respect it. She kept pushing and pushing, getting more aggressive each time I said no. 3 weeks ago, my brothers came to visit. They don't get to see my daughter often since they live across the country, so it was a big deal. We planned a whole weekend of activities. My daughter was so excited she could barely sleep. Saturday morning, she went outside to play in our backyard while I prepared lunch for everyone. My brothers were inside watching TV and catching up. Everything was peaceful until I heard my daughter screaming. I ran outside to find her absolutely soaked, water still dripping from her hair and clothes. She was shivering and crying. Karen was standing in her yard next door holding a high-pressure water hose, looking smug. I demanded to know what she'd done to my daughter. Karen claimed she was just trying to cool her down because it was hot outside. I pointed out that she'd drenched her with a hose and told her to look at my daughter's condition. My daughter was sobbing, her clothes completely soaked through. She ran inside and I followed her. Through her tears, my daughter told me that Karen had said if she didn't go play with her son in the treehouse, she'd make her sorry. I asked what else Karen had said, and my daughter explained that Karen kept saying she was being mean to her son by not wanting to be his girlfriend. Then Karen turned the hose on her when she tried to leave. I was furious. My brothers heard the commotion and came to see what was wrong. When they saw my daughter soaked and crying, and I explained what happened, they lost it. My first brother asked what Karen had done to their niece. My second brother wanted to know where this woman lived. My third brother declared that nobody treats their family like this. I tried to calm them down, but they were having none of it. They'd driven 18 hours to visit us, and some entitled neighbor had just terrorized their niece. My first brother announced they were going to have a conversation with this woman. I suggested calling the police first, but my second brother said the police could wait, and this needed to be handled now. Before I could stop them, all three of my brothers walked out the front door. I followed them, still trying to get them to wait for proper authorities. When we got to Karen's house, she was still in her yard, now watering her flower beds like nothing had happened. Her son was visible in the treehouse, watching everything. My first brother asked if she was the woman who had just attacked their niece. Karen denied attacking anyone and claimed she barely got her wet. My second brother pointed out that she'd terrorized a 10-year-old girl with a high-pressure hose. Karen insisted that my daughter was being disrespectful to her son and someone needed to teach her a lesson. My third brother asked if she thought she was the one to do it. Karen responded that I clearly wasn't doing my job and that my daughter needed to learn some manners. That was the wrong thing to say. My brothers had spent years watching me struggle as a single parent, working 2 jobs to support my daughter while going to school at night. They knew how hard I worked and how well behaved my daughter was. My first brother demanded that Karen apologize to their niece right now. Karen refused, saying she wasn't apologizing for anything and that my daughter needed to stop being stuck up and give her son a chance. My second brother reminded her that her son was 15 and my daughter was 10, asking what was wrong with her. Karen claimed there was nothing wrong with a little childhood romance. My third brother called her sick. Karen told them not to dare talk to her like that and threatened to call the police. My first brother told her to go ahead and call them, saying they'd wait. But instead of calling the police, Karen went back to watering her plants, dismissing us entirely. She clearly thought we were all talk and no action. She was wrong. My brothers looked at each other, and I knew that look. When one of us was seriously wronged, we'd all band together. They'd protected me my whole life, and now they were protecting my daughter. My second brother commented that she wasn't taking this seriously. My third brother suggested maybe she needed help understanding what happens when you mess with family. My first brother agreed. Before I could say anything, my brothers had spread out across Karen's yard. My first brother kicked over her expensive garden gnomes. My second brother started pulling up her prized rose bushes. My third brother found her garden hose and turned it on her precious flower beds, washing away all the mulch. Karen screamed at them to stop demanding to know what they were doing. My first brother told her he was teaching her about what happens when you attack kids. Karen threatened to call the police, but my second brother said she should have thought of that before attacking a child. They didn't stop there. They overturned her decorative wheelbarrow, scattered her garden tools across the yard, and knocked over her bird bath. The treehouse where she'd wanted my daughter to spend time with her teenage son got special attention. They pulled down the ladder, scattered the boards, and made sure it was completely unusable. Karen yelled that this was destruction of property. My third brother replied that so was traumatizing a 10-year-old girl. I told my brothers that was enough, but my first brother questioned whether it really was, pointing out that she'd terrorized my daughter and showed zero remorse. Karen declared that we were all crazy and she was definitely calling the police now. My second brother told her to please do so, saying they'd explain to the police how she'd attacked a child with a high-pressure hose. By the time they were done, Karen's perfect yard looked like a tornado had hit it. Her son had disappeared from the treehouse wreckage, probably gone inside to hide. We walked back to our house. Seeing Karen's shocked face while she surveyed the damage was pretty satisfying. She'd spent months terrorizing us, trying to force an inappropriate relationship between her teenage son and my young daughter, and finally face some payback. That evening, Karen did call the police. They came to our door around dinner time. I explained the situation, showed them my daughter's still damp clothes, and described how Karen had been harassing us for months about her son and my daughter. The officer asked if Karen had used a high-pressure hose on my 10-year-old daughter. I confirmed that she had, after months of trying to force my daughter to date her 15-year-old son. The officer asked if that's when my brothers retaliated. I explained that they were visiting and saw their niece traumatized, so they handled it their own way. The officer took notes and said they'd investigate both incidents. Karen pressed charges for property damage, so we got a lawyer just in case. But when the police interviewed my daughter and heard the full story about Karen's months of harassment and inappropriate behavior regarding her teenage son, things shifted in our favor. Turns out other neighbors had complaints about Karen's son too. Parents had noticed him watching their young daughters, and Karen had made similar inappropriate comments to other families about her son dating much younger girls. The district attorney decided not to press charges against my brothers, citing the circumstances and Karen's pattern of behavior. Karen ended up with charges for child endangerment and harassment instead. 2 weeks later, Karen put her house up for sale. She couldn't handle the neighborhood turning against her after word got out about what she'd done. Her son will be starting at a new school in the fall, hopefully far away from any young girls he might bother. My daughter hasn't been outside alone since the incident, but she's slowly getting back to normal. My brothers check in on us more often now, and the whole neighborhood has been extra protective of the kids since Karen's behavior came to light. Karen's insurance wouldn't cover the yard damage because it was considered retaliation for criminal behavior. She had to pay for all the repairs herself before selling the house. We're still waiting to see if she'll try to sue us, but our lawyer says we have a strong case for harassment and child endangerment. Either way, Karen learned that some lines should never be crossed, especially when it comes to someone's child. Being a mom for 3 months now, nothing prepares you for the constant worry that comes with having a baby. Every little thing feels like it could be dangerous. Maybe that's why what happened last week still has me so shaken up. My friend and I have been close for about 2 years. We met at work and hit it off immediately. She's always been the type to speak her mind, which I usually appreciate. She's also been struggling with fertility issues due to her condition that affects her ovaries, and I've tried to be supportive through all of that. Last Tuesday, I was driving us back from a lunch date. My 3-month-old was in her car seat in the back, and my friend was in the passenger seat. We were chatting about work drama when suddenly I felt this massive impact from behind. The whole car lurched forward, and I heard the terrible sound of metal crunching. Some idiot had rear-ended us at a red light. Apparently, they were texting and didn't see us stopped. The impact wasn't catastrophic, but it was enough to shake us all up pretty badly. The first thing I heard after the crash was my baby screaming. Not her usual crying, but this panicked, terrified wailing that made my heart break. Every instinct I had was telling me to unbuckle her and hold her, to comfort her the way I always do. My friend immediately turned around and started fumbling with the car seat straps. I shouted at her not to touch my baby and told her not to remove her from the seat. My friend protested, saying that the baby was crying and needed to be comforted. I knew she was right about the crying, but I explained that we needed to wait for the paramedics because it was safer to leave her in the seat. My friend asked if I was really going to leave my baby there while she was having a meltdown. I reached back and tried to calm my daughter from where she was, speaking softly and stroking her arm. It killed me not to pick her up, but I knew it was the right thing to do. The car wasn't on fire, we weren't in any mortal danger, and I'd read enough parenting articles to know that moving a child after a car accident could cause serious injury if there was any spinal damage. I told my friend I was trying to soothe her, but she needed to stay in the seat until we knew she was okay. My friend kept arguing with me, but I held firm. The paramedics arrived within 10 minutes, and they confirmed that leaving her in the car seat was absolutely the right call. They carefully removed her while keeping her spine aligned and transported all of us to the hospital for evaluation. At the hospital, my friend and I both got cleared quickly, just some minor bruising and soreness, but they wanted to do more thorough checks on the baby since she was so young. We sat in the waiting room while they ran tests. That's when my friend really let me have it. She told me she couldn't believe I just sat there and let my baby cry like that. She asked what kind of mother I was. When I asked her to repeat that, she said, I heard her correctly. She went on to say that any normal mother would have immediately comforted their child, but I just sat there following some stupid rule while my baby was traumatized. I was already stressed from the accident and worried about my daughter. The last thing I needed was someone questioning my parenting. I reminded her that I had explained why I did that and that it was to protect her in case there was spinal injury. She called that ridiculous and said I could see the baby was fine because she was crying, which meant she was conscious and moving. She accused me of putting following rules over my baby's emotional needs. I said that I was trying to protect her from potentially life-threatening injuries. That's when she really crossed the line and called me a terrible mother. She said she couldn't believe I prioritized some theoretical injury over actually comforting my screaming child. That's when I lost it. I've been holding in all my stress and fear, and having someone attack my parenting when I was already feeling vulnerable was too much. I told her that when she had her own kid and God forbid got into a crash, she could yank her child out of the car seat and do whatever she wanted. But I was going to follow medical advice and keep my baby safe. The moment the words left my mouth, I could see her face change. She got this look of hurt and anger that I'd never seen before. She asked how I dared say that to her. She reminded me that I knew she'd been trying to get pregnant for 2 years and that I knew she had fertility issues and might never be able to carry a pregnancy to term. She accused me of throwing that in her face. I told her I wasn't throwing anything in her face and that I was talking about a hypothetical situation. She called that bull and said I knew exactly what I was saying. She accused me of using her infertility against her because I couldn't handle being called out for bad parenting. I said I wasn't using anything against her and that I was just saying that when she was responsible for a child's safety, she'd understand why I made the choice I did. She shot back that if she was ever lucky enough to have a child, she'd actually put their emotional needs first instead of hiding behind medical jargon. At that point, a nurse came out to tell us that my baby was perfectly fine, no injuries at all. The relief I felt was overwhelming, but my friend wasn't done. She pointed out that the baby was fine the whole time and said I had put her through unnecessary trauma for nothing. I replied that the point was, we didn't know she was fine and that's why you wait. She dismissed this with a whatever and said she was calling a ride because she couldn't be around someone who would use her fertility struggles against her. I tried to tell her that wasn't what I was doing, but she was already walking away, phone in hand. She left me there in the hospital waiting room, still shaking from the accident, and now dealing with the aftermath of our fight. Looking back, I know I could have phrased things differently. The comment about her having her own kid was probably insensitive given her situation, but I was stressed, scared, and being attacked for making what I believed was the right choice for my child's safety. The real kicker came 2 days later when I found out from a mutual friend that she'd been posting on social media about the incident. She was painting me as this heartless mother who cared more about following rules than comforting my traumatized baby. She even posted about how I cruelly threw her infertility in her face when she was just trying to help. What she didn't mention in her posts was that every paramedic, doctor, and nurse we encountered that day praised me for leaving my baby in the car seat. She didn't mention that the emergency room doctor specifically told me that removing a child from a car seat after an accident is one of the most dangerous things you can do. I tried reaching out to her to talk things through, but she blocked me on everything. Apparently, in her mind, I'm both a terrible mother and a terrible friend. The whole situation has left me questioning everything. Maybe I was too harsh in how I spoke to her. Maybe I should have been more sensitive about her fertility struggles. But I can't shake the feeling that she was completely out of line for attacking my parenting in such a vulnerable moment. The worst part is that I lost a friend over this. Someone I genuinely cared about decided that being right about child rearing was more important than understanding why a scared mother made the choice she did. And now she is telling everyone who will listen that I'm some kind of monster. This happened when I was about 9 years old back in the early 2000s. I need to give you some background first because it's important to understand why what happened was so crazy. I was an autistic kid, though we didn't really understand what that meant back then. My parents just knew I was different and that I had a hard time understanding social cues and unwritten rules. I took everything literally, which got me in trouble a lot. My dad especially had no patience for my questions or when I didn't immediately understand something he thought was obvious. The early 2000s were also a time when stranger danger was everywhere. Schools had assemblies about it, there were PSAs on TV, and parents were constantly warning kids about suspicious people. My dad was actually pretty good about teaching me safety rules. He'd drill me on what to do if someone tried to grab me, what to say if a stranger offered me candy, and how to recognize dangerous situations. One of the biggest rules he hammered into my head was about inappropriate touching. My dad would tell me to remember that if anyone ever tried to touch me in a way that made me uncomfortable, I should tell the police immediately. He said nobody had the right to touch me like that. When I asked what if it was someone I knew, he made it clear that it didn't matter who it was. Family, friends, teachers, anyone. I should call the police and tell them what happened. He was really serious about this stuff, which is why what happened next was so ridiculous. My dad had this thing where he'd get really angry over small stuff. When I didn't always understand the social rules about when to speak up and when to stay quiet, I'd ask questions at the wrong times or point out things that didn't make sense to me. Adults called this talking back, but to me, I was just trying to understand. On this particular day, I don't even remember what I did wrong. Maybe I asked too many questions during his favorite TV show, or maybe I corrected him about something factual. Whatever it was, he got that look on his face that meant I was in big trouble. My dad announced that I was getting a spanking for talking back to him. Now, my dad believed in corporal punishment, and spanking was his go-to discipline method. But here's the thing. He taught me so well about stranger danger and inappropriate touching that my 9-year-old brain started making connections he probably didn't expect. I panicked and started running around the house while he chased me. We went from the living room to the kitchen, around the dining table, and back toward the hallway. He was getting more frustrated by the second. He yelled at me to get back there right away and said I was just making it worse for myself. But I kept running because I was scared and confused. Then I remembered all those safety lessons. I grabbed the cordless phone from the kitchen counter and held it up like a weapon. I shouted that if he spanked me one more time, I was going to call the police and tell them he touched my butt. My dad stopped dead in his tracks. His face went through about 5 different emotions in 2 seconds. First confusion, then realization, then panic, then anger, and finally something that looked like respect. He asked if I was serious, clearly shocked. I told him that he'd taught me that if anyone tried to touch me inappropriately, I should call the police. I reminded him that he'd said it didn't matter who it was, even family. I was completely serious. In my literal autistic way of thinking, I was just following the rules he'd taught me. Spanking involved touching my bottom, and he'd said that was an inappropriate place for people to touch. The math seemed pretty simple to me. My dad tried to argue that it was different because he was my father, and that spanking was discipline, not the same thing. But I pointed out that he'd said anyone, and that he'd been very clear it didn't matter who it was. I could see him trying to figure out how to argue with his own safety lessons. He'd been so thorough in teaching me about inappropriate touching that he'd accidentally created a loophole in his own punishment system. The whole situation was so absurd that I think he realized how it would look if a 9-year-old called the police to report that their father was chasing them around the house trying to touch their bottom. Even though spanking was legal and common, the optics were terrible. My dad told me to put the phone down and said we needed to talk about this. I asked if he was going to spank me. He said no and just asked me to put the phone down. I lowered the phone but kept it in my hand, ready to dial if needed. My dad sat down heavily on the couch and put his head in his hands. He asked if I realized I just threatened to call the police on my own father. I told him that he'd taught me to protect myself, and that's what I was doing. He looked at me for a long moment, and I think he finally understood how his own lessons had backfired on him. Here he was, trying to punish me for being too literal and argumentative, and I just out-argued him using his own rules. My dad said this wasn't what he meant when he taught me about stranger danger, but I reminded him that he'd said it applied to everyone and that he'd been very clear about that. The irony wasn't lost on him. He'd been so concerned about protecting me from strangers that he'd accidentally given me the tools to protect myself from him too. And even though he was frustrated with me, I think part of him was actually proud that I'd remembered his lessons so well. From that day forward, spanking was off the table. Not because he suddenly became opposed to corporal punishment, but because I'd found the perfect defense against it. Every time he got angry enough to threaten physical discipline, I'd just look at him and he'd remember our conversation about inappropriate touching. He couldn't even complain about it to other adults without admitting that his 9-year-old had outsmarted him using his own safety rules. How do you explain that your kid threatened to call the police on you for trying to spank them, and that you backed down because technically they weren't wrong? My mom found out about the whole thing later that week when she noticed that Dad had stopped threatening spankings entirely. She asked what happened and why he'd stopped saying he'd spank me when I misbehaved. My dad just said I'd gotten too smart for my own good and that she should leave it at that. When she asked what he meant, he told her to trust him and said she didn't want to know. And now we have reached the end of today's stories. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.